We are going to learn today the 11th letter, and this 11th letter is very powerful, very high-minded. Some of you might feel too high-minded, too beyond. The truth is, it is the bar that is set perhaps at the highest level, and it's not about reaching the bar, it's about being aware of it and reaching towards the bar. It's not black, the teachings are black and white. Our service of God and our growth in this area in particular is not black and white. So that is a preface to this 11th letter. So, as always, we will learn the teachings as they are, try to unpack it, and then we'll have some questions. This is for the terminology, if you want, in Hebrew. This letter is the famous letter called Lahaskilcha Bina, to enlighten you with understanding. So, like the word seichel, Lahaskilcha, to give seichel, an enlightenment, Bina, with an understanding. So he begins at the path to have the light of God dwell within a person cannot be by desiring the life of flesh and family life and sustenance. Meaning, he's negating that this is not what life is, its end goal. In other words, to have pleasure in life of the flesh, to have pleasure from family life, and pleasure from one's sustenance, one's work. Rather, it's a desire that these things should be for a purposeful need, as opposed to an end in themselves. And this is what the sages teach us. Batel Ritzeincha. In Pirkei Avos, in the second chapter of Ethics of our Fathers, nullify your will out of deference to God's will. Now, the simple meaning means, well, you got your own will, put it aside, because God's will is what's most important. But the Alter Rebbe, that's not the way he's understanding that. He's understanding it, nullify your will. In other words, there is no will but the will of God. No desire but the will of God to be fulfilled. In other words, you don't have a desire even for worldly matters, even in essential things like family life, health, and livelihood. In other words, not desiring them in for themselves, but only as they are there as a means to a higher goal, to serve God, to fulfill the spiritual task that we've been created for. A very high level of existence, of course. So what does it mean? It means nullifying this term, nullifying your will, batel, nullifying your will means that you don't have a will, you don't have a wish in these areas. Your wish is only the service of God. And this is also what our sages tell us, also in Pirkei Avos, and this is in chapter 4. Al korchach ata chai. Against your will do you live. It's not a question, it's a statement. In other words, against your will, it's not your will to have life, meaning material life, or the pleasure of life. not seeking to have the pleasure in life. Again, in what areas we're talking about, even in family life. Not that you don't have the pleasure in it, but that's not what you're seeking in life, to have that pleasure. You're not seeking the pleasure of good health. You're not seeking the pleasure of, being comfortable, making a living and the like. You have no yearning desire for those things. That's what it means. Against your will, do you live life? In other words, there's an equanimity that a person has, and they're not pained by the absence of not having in any of these areas. Family life, health, and wealth. So the obvious question, how can you achieve this? I mean, it's a high bar, extremely high bar. And as I mentioned previously, this is about not the achievement of this, even though the Alter Rebbe is speaking about achieving it. And we'll see very strong words that he speaks about when we don't. All right? So, how do we reach this? How can this be achieved? So this is what the Alter Rebbe is going to teach us now. Can be achieved with what he calls emuna amitis, true and absolute belief in, when he uses the term in reference to God, Yotzer Bereshis, which is a term that we use in Aleinu, the prayer of Aleinu, for those who are familiar. What does it mean, Yotzer Bereshis? It means the one who brings into being creation, the beginning of creation. It's interesting, the beginning of the onset of creation. Reshis means first, beginning. It refers to the first divine attribute, which is Chokhmah, wisdom. Well, we translate it as wisdom, right? And this means that creation, which is a yesh, a something, comes from Reshis, Chokhmah, which Chokhmah, divine wisdom, that point, right? Just like in our wisdom, it's the flash, it's the seminal seed. So we call that ayin, nothingness. Not nothingness because it's nothing, but it's no thing. And it's therefore, since it's no thing that we can comprehend, that we have experienced, it transcends us. So creation comes from a point of transcendence that we don't comprehend, chachma, and brings into being a something that's called ex nihilo, something from nothing, yesh mi'ayin. And when does this occur, this act of creation? Every single moment. God is bringing Yetzer Bereshis, right? Bringing into creation the yesh, the something, me being the something, the world being the something, being animated by God every single moment. This is not something that we can understand because in the human condition, what we understand is cause and effect, ila va'elul, as it's called in the Hebrew term, cause and effect, right? Yesh, cause and effect means, my intelligence, and when I understand something can affect my emotions, but then my emotions being that they're a separate entity from my intelligence. My intelligence doesn't create emotions. It affects, it causes an emotion to be revealed, but that emotion is a reality or an existence of its own, and it has its own root and source that's not in intelligence. But it just causes the effect of the emotion to be revealed and have its own existence. Not so something from nothing. The something that is got no reality, no existence, rather only the nothingness, which is the chachma that we're talking about, or Yetzer Bereshis, that is continuously vested in it to give it existence. So that means God is constantly creating the universe, which means me, and the situation that I'm in right now, anew, something from the ayin of Chokhmah every moment. So now, take that for a moment, comprehend it, understand that, skill chabina, to be enlightened by this understanding, right? That if you can, we think about it and picture in our mind, God is creator, creating ex nihilo, something from nothing, yesh mi'ayin every moment. What does that mean? It means God is creating this moment, meaning it's a Kodak moment, because God's creating it. And therefore, how can we entertain, the Alter Rebbe says, a thought of suffering or any affliction that's related even to real important things like family life, like health, our own health, and sustenance and livelihood, or whatever other worldly suffering that we might be going through. Because what's happening at this moment is God, through the Ein Sof that is vested in the Chachma, that's giving vitality in this moment, giving life, is coming from the goodness and delight. It's a goodness. Such a goodness, it's even greater than that in Gan Eden. Even that which transcends the Garden of Eden. The difference, though, is in the Garden of Eden, we get a glimmer that we can apprehend. Here, this is beyond our apprehension. Therefore, we imagine it to be suffering or affliction. But in truth, there's no evil that descends from above. Everything is but good, as the Medrash says. Although we do not comprehend it with our minds, but it is an immense and abundant goodness that is beyond our comprehension. As we learn in the chapter 26 in the first part of Tanya, comes from a higher place in the divine order of things. And the Alter Rebbe says now, this is the essence of what it means, faith. And this is actually what a person was created for, to have this faith, meaning that there is no place devoid of God. So whatever is being animated in this moment, God forbid something in a person's unhealthy situation, literally in them or the situation around them, it is ultimately, it's the light of the King's countenance. And where there's the light of the King's countenance, there is life. There is life. And therefore, accordingly, strength and gladness are in such a place. Because again, it's a Kodak moment. Because God is but good at all times. Let's unpack this. Let's understand this and appreciate this. As mentioned, a very high level of being. Metaphorically, perhaps we can give, like the sun gives life. Sometimes the sun is so bright that when you look at it, it's blinding. So it's very powerful, it's very strong, and it's good. But that doesn't mean I don't experience it in the moment as something that is blinding, and therefore maybe even painful. So what we got over here, the way I see it, we have the way the eye, the physical eye, sees things and experiences it. And then there's the mind's eye. What the Alter Rebbe is trying to create for us is an awareness of what the physical eye might see is not the real truth. Not just the physical eye, but I guess you could say all our five senses. The five senses give us a reality that, this smells terrible. This tastes terrible. What I hear is painful. What I feel is hurtful or painful because you stepped on my toe. You said something nasty. It hurt. It feels hurtful. What I see is tragic. And that is what the human condition is. And no doubt. Now, very important, we're talking about how we deal with things. We're not talking about how you should deal with other people who are going through something tragic, something painful. That's not at all what we're talking about. So that's very important that we remain focused on the point over here, and not to bring up the Holocaust, and not to bring up, another tragedy that, personal tragedy that a person went, that someone that went through. That's a different conversation, and we're not going. I don't want to go off on that. That we need to be empathetic, and that's the paradox, is that for someone else to be empathetic rather than telling them, well, don't you know this is a Kodak moment? Get over it. That's not what you say. We're talking about what you say to yourself. And really, I'm not even saying this to you. I'm saying this to myself. I'm saying this to myself. I've got to imbue this true faith in me to, as I mentioned, the bar is very high, and, just to strive in that direction more and more. So very important. We're only talking about here how to talk to yourself, not how to deal with another human being. So what we got over here is five senses, and that's how we live our life of the flesh. Now, he says, don't live the life of the flesh. See what's in your mind's eye. He's trying to give us what our true faith is, which is not in the physical eye, but it's in the mind's eye that we can now contemplate in the mind's eye. And what is that contemplation that we can think about? Is that God is creating this moment. And if it's God creating it, so it's got to be a Kodak moment. I don't get it. Okay. Who says you got to get it? Who says you have to understand? Why? Why do you have to understand? Maybe that's our evil inclination talking to us. Well, I don't get it. Okay, so the truth is, if we were honest with ourselves and we looked at how we live our lives, most of the life that we live is not based on logic and rationale. It's not based on a whim, not a desire. Well, you ate that food that wasn't healthy for you, and you want to live a healthy life. Why'd you eat it? Because you want it. Right? Oh, that's not rationale. Oh, but when it's good for us, we're okay with that we don't act rationally. But when something that's painful to us, now we're going to complain to God? God, I don't get it. Well, you didn't act that way. Most of your life, we don't act that way, by the way. I'm sorry to be so harsh. Most of our lives, we don't. I mean, we do what we want, what's comfortable, what's good, feels good. The five senses again, right? But then when something painful comes, all of a sudden I need a rational understanding so that I can accept it. No. And again, we're talking about for ourselves. For ourselves merely. Not how to respond to others. That's with empathy. That's a whole different discussion, and we're not going there. I briefly gave that distinction. So when he's saying Yoitze Bereshis, and that's the term that he uses, is to bring out this notion that we are that there is in the mind's eye we can have an awareness that there is that which is Yesh Mi'ayin, God creating the world, that he vests himself every moment because the something that he creates is not coming from a cause and effect, and therefore, I cause this pen to, I threw the pen, and because of it, there was an effect that it moved forward. But afterwards, it's sitting there, independent of my cause, the cause that I propelled it. It exists, independent of the cause of throwing it. But not so when it comes to something from nothing. There, it is the Creator constantly vested within it, creating it every moment. It's God creating this moment. Therefore, it's really a Kodak moment. And if it's a Kodak moment from God, that means it's all good. Now, there's a revealed good, and there's a greater good that is blinding, that we experience as pain with our five senses, hurtful, tragic. No doubt. I mean, this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying is nullify that will. Don't live with that reality. Live with the reality of this truth.